The headlines. The Israeli army says it's preparing for a ground invasion of Lebanon. Another 2 brigades of troops are headed for the border. The UN says more than 90,000 people have been displaced since Monday as a result of Israeli strikes. Diplomatic efforts are underway at the UN to try and prevent a wider war in the Middle East.
Hell is breaking loose in Lebanon. As I told the General Assembly yesterday, we should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink.
In other news, voting ends in the second phase of elections in Indian-administered Kashmir, the first vote in 10 years. And a zoo in Finland will return 2 giant pandas to China 8 years early.
The EU and 10 countries joined together to call for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah as tensions continue to escalate in the region. The US pledges more military aid to Ukraine ahead of a meeting between Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky. And Vice President Kamala Harris sits down for her first one-on-one interview since announcing her bid for US president. Now, we've just got a piece of breaking news to bring to you, and that is that the Mayor of New York, Eric Adams, has been indicted on federal criminal charges. That's according to the New York Times and local media reporting. He'll become the first mayor in New York City history to be charged while still in office. The nature of the charges are not known at this stage because the indictment is sealed. Federal prosecutors are expected to announce the details of the indictment on Thursday. The move comes in the wake of several investigations involving the mayor and members of his administration. Eric Adams was elected as mayor 3 years ago, pledging to reduce crime and bring professionalism to the city government. Earlier today, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called for Mayor Adams to resign, as she said, for the good of the city. And in the last few minutes, the BBC has obtained this statement from Mayor Adams. He said, "I always knew that if I stood my ground for New Yorkers, that I would be a target, and a target I became. If I am charged, I am innocent, and I will fight this with every ounce of my strength and spirit." We'll bring more to you on that as we get it. But let's turn now to some other news from around the world. A far-reaching investigation has concluded that Kenyan police used excessive force to clamp down on mass protests earlier this year. Amnesty International found unnecessary force led to the deaths of at least 6 people during protests at the country's parliamentary complex. Hundreds more were injured as a result of police using live ammunition. And preparations are underway in parts of Florida and Georgia for Hurricane Helene, which is expected to make landfall in the Gulf as a potential Category 3 storm on Thursday. Forecasters are warning it could bring a life-threatening storm surge as well as strong and damaging winds to a large portion of Florida and the southeast US. Parts of Mexico have already seen severe flooding as a result of that storm. You can
Headlines today. The UN Secretary-General warns that hell has broken loose in Lebanon as the UK and other allies call for a temporary 21-day ceasefire.
The airstrikes must stop now. Talks must start now, with an immediate ceasefire on both sides now.
New harrowing testimony from a woman who says she was raped by the former Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed when she was 16.
The Ministry of Justice confirms that dozens of people released from jail under the government's emergency prison scheme last month were freed by mistake.
Good morning. With the exceptionally rainy weather we've had over the past year, there have been concerns about the effect on the harvest of crops used to make the things we all eat and drink. I've come to this brewery in Stoke to find out how much it could affect the price of your pint of beer.
Let's have a look at the Thursday morning papers.
We begin with the Eye. That's reporting on the potential entry of Israeli troops into Lebanon. That's dominating many of the front pages. It says Sir Keir Starmer's urgent message to the Prime Minister of Israel to step back from the brink as Israel signals a possible ground invasion.
Let's have a look at The Guardian, reporting the Prime Minister is under increasing pressure from senior aides to deal with infighting across government involving his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, after it was revealed she was paid $3,000 more than him a year.
The Daily Express leads on unions winning a vote at Labour Party conference yesterday, calling on the government to reverse its cuts to winter fuel payments.
And in the Times reports that ministers are drawing up plans for Texas-style prison reforms in England and Wales, which would allow inmates to win points towards reducing their jail time by taking part in workshops.
A month on since a fire at a block of flats in Dagenham that saw more than 80 people evacuated, the local council are calling on the company that managed the block to do more to support residents. Barking and Dagenham Council continuing to fund temporary accommodation despite no council tenants living in the block, and says that Block Management UK have a moral duty to support residents. Block Management UK said it's hired by the building owner to manage the common parts of the property and not the individual flats. The Met Police has announced what it's called a child-first approach to policing. All officers will receive new training in childhood vulnerability and what's called adultification bias, which means young people from certain backgrounds are viewed as more grown up. Scotland Yard also plans to integrate trained schools officers into neighbourhood ward teams. The mother of a student from Buckinghamshire who was murdered on a night out is calling for victims of non-contact sexual offences to report the crimes. Libby Squire was raped and killed, her body later found in the River Humber. Her killer, Pavio Relevich, had a pattern of previous offending. Libby's mother has been working with Thames Valley Police on a campaign with the slogan, "It does matter."
When I've been speaking to young women, they've said that they, A, haven't realised they could, they didn't think it was important, they didn't think it mattered. They say, well, I wasn't hurt, you know, and a lot of them just don't know how to report. And I think historically women have been conditioned to accept that that sort of thing goes on.
A crowdfunding page set up to raise money for AFC Wimbledon after the club's pitch was damaged by flooding has received more than £100,000 in donations. Parts of the ground in Plough Lane were left underwater after large amounts of rain fell in the area on Sunday night and Monday morning, causing extensive damage to the pitch.
And the item that's the third most used appliance in Britain's kitchen, now used more than conventional ovens. How the air fryer seems to be more than just a passing fad.
Feel that 19 women made allegations against former Harrods boss Mohammed Al Fayed in the past 20 years, but no further action was taken. Multiple women say they had sexual health tests when they worked at Harrods. Tonight, one of the doctors accused denies it.
Did you carry out STD tests on Harrods staff members?
No.
I did not.
Also on the programme tonight, Israel's Prime Minister tells the army to fight on.
I'll be live from Lebanon, where a further 26 people have been killed today in Israeli airstrikes, raising questions about whether a mooted ceasefire from world leaders at the UN can really be achieved.
The UK COVID inquiry, a senior doctor breaks down in tears as he describes what he called scenes from hell in hospitals during the pandemic. Naomi Campbell is banned from being a charity trustee after a watchdog finds funds were spent on spa treatments and cigarettes. And the tale of Greg James and Long Boy, why the Radio 1 star ended up spending the morning in York unveiling a statue of a duck.
A Japanese man who was the world's longest-held death row inmate has finally been acquitted after being framed for mass murder. Ueo Hakamada was convicted of killing his boss and his boss's family in 1966. His sister fought for decades to clear his name, and he was finally released after 58 years when a court found key evidence was fabricated by investigators. A memorial to the Brontë sisters has had the dots above their surname added 85 years after it was installed. The dots on the E in Brontë were omitted when Charlotte, Emily and Anne were commemorated at Westminster Abbey amid the outbreak of the Second World War.
speaking to the man who was asked to leave a restaurant in South London because of the way he looks. Plus,
the toilet was the other side, so openly faced towards my house.
How a toilet for bus drivers has proved controversial in South London, particularly among those who live very nearby. And it's one of our most solemn memorials. But just how did the tomb of the unknown warrior come about? The Wi-Fi network at 20 large railway stations has been targeted by hackers. People reported logging on and being met with a screen about terror attacks in Europe. Well, the stations affected include Euston, London Bridge, King's Cross, Paddington and Waterloo. It comes weeks after hackers targeted Transport for London systems. Issues at TfL are still ongoing. A 45-year-old man from Sutton has admitted to murdering a woman. Stephen Sanson appeared in court and pleaded guilty to killing 38-year-old Sarah Mayhew. It was also revealed that he was convicted of murdering a minicab driver in Croydon as a teenager. An 18-year-old has been charged with murdering this 15-year-old schoolboy in Woolwich on Sunday. Dajwan Campbell was stabbed with a so-called zombie knife on Eglinton Road. Jacob Loshevich from Abbey Wood appeared at Bromley Magistrates Court. This afternoon, Dajwan's family attended a vigil for their son in Woolwich. Indecent exposure, flashing, voyeurism and upskirting are all categorised as non-contact sexual offences. And there's a drive to encourage more women and men to report them. It's thought there are around 20 times more offences committed than they are reported, and police are keen to change that.
It is just after 7 o'clock. Here's what's still ahead. The long-awaited Windrush report finds laws were created to reduce the number of people in the UK who weren't white.
I lost everything. Even today, I'm still in debt. I got some compensation, but it's just not enough. It still put you back.
The sentencing begins of two 13-year-olds found guilty of murdering a teenager in a random machete attack. Two families whose lives have been torn apart by dangerous drivers meet as they fight for better road safety. The Bridgerton ball experience that was less romance and more royal flop.